Hi guys.
Hello.
Welcome back to Spooky Sleuths. Today we're bringing you a special episode because it involves Sammy's hometown.
Yeah, so it's going to be a serial killer episode. Let's get into it.
I'm ready.
So we're going to be talking about a Craigslist killer. I'm Sammy.
And I'm Nicole.
And we are Spooky Sleuths. So there's a couple Craigslist killers, but this one specifically, some people call him the other Craigslist killer. So Craigslist was a very popular website in the 2000s. It still exists, but I don't hear about as many people going on it today. It's an online classified advertisement website with many different sections. You can find anything on Craigslist: items for sale, missed connections, housing, and even employment. I can remember going on Craigslist and buying cell phones. Like before everything was through like Verizon or AT&T. When I needed a new cell phone, I'd go buy one off there.
And this was before if like Facebook Marketplace was a thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
You basically had like eBay and Craigslist.
It was created in 1995, my birth year. It expanded to the entire United States and is now available in 70 countries. Unfortunately, not all ads that are placed are with good intent. So let's talk about this Craigslist killer it's not too far from where we live now. And like Nicole said, it's my hometown that this took place in. We're going to talk about two killers in this episode that work together. Richard Beasley.
I didn't realize there was two.
Yep. Richard Beasley. He has no relation to Pam Beasley. If you know, you know.
I don't know.
It's an Office reference.
Oh, God. Of course it is. It's like, I don't know. Okay.
And Brogan Rafferty. Richard Beasley was born in 1959 and is an Ohio native. He mostly resided in the Akron, Ohio area. He has a lengthy criminal history surrounding substance abuse and theft.
Okay.
In and out of prisons. But now he was giving the impression to the outside world that he was a changed man.
He is.
He was known in Akron, Ohio as someone whose life was changed through church. He would mentor people in the community and say that their lives could change through Jesus. So he was very religious. He would frequently appear in court to speak for defendants, saying he would take them to his halfway house and recover them. Once the defendants would be released to his halfway house, he would deal them drugs and get them right back into the criminal life.
How long did that go on for? Do we know?
I don't know. A long time.
That's sad.
One person referred to him as a snake oil salesman. So you can kind of gauge what this person was like. And by the way, I just want to kind of throw a little disclaimer in here that I got all of this information that I'm going to share with you from a few sources. One is an Oxygen true crime docuseries called Mastermind of Murder, and the rest is from newspaper articles, different news coverage of this case. Anything that is incorrect, I apologize. Those are my sources.
Please correct us, though.
Yes. Let us know.
Like, if you have any ties to this at all and would like to, comment in on it, please do. Please reach out.
Yeah. So we're trying to do this to the best of our abilities to give you fair and accurate information.
Which we do in every episode, but because this one's so close to home, we know somebody is going to know this case.
Absolutely. So Richard was facing a life sentence in prison for several charges, according to Noble County, Ohio's sheriff at the time, Stephen Hannum. The sheriff had received a call the week prior from the U.S. Marshals saying they were actually watching the area looking for Richard.
Oh.
So the sheriff was familiar with him.
Well, yeah, he had a lifetime of crime.
Yes. But this is down near in Caldwell, Ohio, in Noble County, not Akron, where he typically lived. But he was frequenting the
I missed it. Sorry.
Noble County area for drug-related crimes.
Okay.
So the Noble County Sheriff was aware. Now let's talk about Brogan Rafferty. He was only a junior in high school. He was an okay student, very polite, but suspicious of authority. His mom was absent. Always,
a teenager is suspicious for authority? Crazy.
His mom was absent, always coming and going, and his dad worked long hours as a machinist. Brogan really didn't have a parental figure to guide him. Not that his dad really did anything wrong, he just had to work to keep the lights on. Richard was a family friend of the Raffertys. He began taking Brogan to church when Brogan was 9 years old.
Richard sounds so sweet.
It does.
I'm sure it does not end so sweet.
Well, Richard
obviously we wouldn't be talking about it.
Right. Richard and Brogan, they were very close, almost like a father-son relationship. But Richard was grooming him and needed his help when it was time to commit his murders. See, Richard was a wanted man. He didn't want to spend the rest of his life in prison, so he decided that he needed to kill men that resembled him in order to steal their identities and avoid his prison sentence. On November 11th, 2011, the Noble County Sheriff's Office in Caldwell, Ohio, received a 911 call that stated someone was knocking on their door and that person was shot. The man was running from someone and needed help immediately. I actually know this family. I went to school with a member of this family, so I'm not going to say their name, but that was very interesting. I remember the story coming out and me being like, oh my gosh, I know him. I go to school with him, which is a little bit insane to me. The man who had been shot, his name was Scott Davis. He recently moved to Ohio from South Carolina. He had a nice home on a lot of land and ran his own landscaping company in South Carolina. But his mother lived in Ohio, and she asked that Scott come to help her as she was aging and just needed more help. So Scott made the move. He was looking for a job while he was in Ohio and came across a Craigslist advertisement for someone who needed help running their 680-acre farm. The advertisement stated that the employee would make $300 a week and have all expenses covered.
Like a pretty sweet deal.
Yeah.
For somebody that needs to get into the area.
The full advertisement was, wanted, caretaker for farm. Simply watch over a 680-acre patch of hilly farmland and feed a few cows. You get $300 a week and a nice 2-bedroom trailer. Someone older and single preferred. This sounded perfect to Scott, so he applied for the position. Scott met a man who he knew as Jack and Jack's nephew at the Shoney's restaurant in Marietta, Ohio for breakfast on November 11th to discuss.
Rock that Shoney's all the time.
I have actually never been there, but they met there to discuss the job and details surrounding the work that needed done. Now, Jack is Richard Beasley and his nephew is Brogan. Just keep that in mind because they use a lot of aliases, so it can be a little bit confusing. Scott thinks everything is normal at this point. After breakfast, Jack and Jack's nephew and Scott get into Jack's truck, and the nephew drives them out to the farm.
Red flags, all red flags.
On the way there, Jack tells his nephew to pull over where they shot a deer the previous week so they can grab it. They pull off to the side of the road out in a wooded area.
Wait a week.
Right, it's decomposing at that point. They pull off to the side of the road out in a wooded area. Jack has Scott come with him to find the deer. After they don't find it, Jack tells Scott that it must be further back, so they keep going. Scott gets in front of Jack somehow, and he hears the safety turn off on a pew-pew weapon. He turns around and sees Jack pointing that pew-pew weapon at him. Scott says Jack's eyes are pitch black and soulless. Jack shoots Scott and hits his elbow. So Scott took off running.
I guarantee it.
He lost his hat in the process.
Good for Scott.
He found a place to hide near a stream in a ravine, and he doesn't even realize he's bleeding because he has so much adrenaline pumping through him. So Scott is hiding and he's confused. So he hears this Jack guy and his nephew walking through the woods looking for him, but he remains hidden. Scott waits for over 7 hours before he feels safe to make a run for it. He is cold. He's hungry, he's bleeding scared, and he knows he has to move. He was very weak, but he still mustered the energy to walk for miles until he came upon a house.
Because you would be weak. All that adrenaline wearing off, if it's wearing off, because it would still be going, which is draining. You're losing blood. Even just a little bit of blood over a long period of time, still draining. I'm sure you were sitting there on pins and needles, like looking around.
Oh, absolutely. And that is
exhausting,
being scared. There was a truck outside of the house that he had came upon, and it had hunting bows in the back. So he was terrified, thinking he just found the home of his attacker. He decided to knock on the door anyways. He knew he wouldn't make it much further. He had to. A boy came to the door, and Scott asked if the boy's dad was home. The boy said his dad wasn't, but his grandma was, and he went to get her. And the woman called 911, and she attempted to tend to Scott's wound. The ambulance came and took Scott to the hospital, and thankfully he survived.
Yeah.
But now we're involving the police. The Noble County Sheriff's Office is starting to investigate.
I was like, do we have any deaths prior to this?
Yes, but not that they're unknown at this point.
Okay, so like we have no idea at this point.
Yes.
Okay.
They being the police, thought that they should start with who placed the Craigslist ad and try to get security footage from the Shoney's restaurant that the victim had met Jack at. Well, the night before the police went to the Shoney's, there was a mysterious fire in the back office that destroyed the office. They were still hoping to get some security footage somehow, so they still had to try to get something to work with. Meanwhile, they're turning their attention to the physical location of the attack. At this point, they think this is an isolated incident, but they would soon discover that they had a serial killer on their hands. Scott wasn't able to give the sheriff much information about the location, but he did remember the stream. He also left his hat in the woods, about 20 feet from where the shooting took place, actually, is where it fell off. So the sheriff's office started searching through the woods by foot, starting at the home that Scott found and working backwards.
That makes sense.
They found the crime scene when they found his hat.
And I don't think he intentionally left the hat.
No, but it was so good that he did.
Right? Like Cindy leaving her shoes there.
Right.
From our other episode.
The Robert Hansen.
Yeah.
So they found the crime scene, decided to search around it for more clues. While searching, the sheriff stumbles upon a hand-dug grave intended for Scott. Now
we got premeditation, definitely.
Right. Now the sheriff decides he needs to call in some backup, including cadaver dogs.
Why did you go in without backup?
It's kind of similar to the town we live in now. It's very small.
You don't.
It just doesn't warrant that.
You probably don't automatically assume the worst.
No.
In Little Noble County.
No. They noticed that one area had a dug up hole in the ground, and in this hole there was a pool of water, and blood was bubbling up in the water. So the sheriffs dug it up, and they found a male body with a pew-pew shot to the back of the head. They also found a specific piece of jewelry on the body that they collected as evidence. When the story hit the news, the sheriff's office got a call from a woman named Deborah Bruce. She thinks her brother is a victim of this Jack character. Deborah's brother, named David Pauly, answered a similar ad on Craigslist as Scott did. Bruce was struggling to find work, and he was so excited that he was accepted for this position. Bruce met Jack for breakfast, and Deborah never heard from him again. So it seems like this is his MO. He's putting an ad out, telling them his name's Jack, taking him to the Shoney's, taking him out to the woods. So Deborah did report her brother missing, but she continued to call his phone, leaving him messages promising to find him and promising to bring him home. She had a gut feeling that her brother was another victim.
Right. How could you not after all this comes to light?
Exactly.
And it's so similar.
Well, when the sheriff found this bracelet with a male body, he called Deborah and asked her about jewelry that David owned. Deborah confirmed that this leather bracelet with a silver clasp belonged to her brother. Obviously, Deborah was distraught.
Yeah.
Now that the sheriff's office realized they had multiple victims on their hands, they called the FBI for help.
Yeah, because at this point, it's at least one confirmed, one attempted.
Right. They needed the Cyber Squad's help at the FBI to find the source of this advertisement. Cyber Squad was busy at work trying to locate the IP address for the person who placed the ad, knowing they would be able to get an address and a physical address and go talk to the person.
Were internet cafes a thing? Like, did they have free Wi-Fi everywhere at that point?
I don't know.
I'm just thinking, because I know, like, of other cases that they place those ads and things like that, like, at that kind of a thing. Okay.
I'm not sure.
Just keep going.
While the Cyber Squad is hard at work, the sheriff's office continued to search the woods. They found some foliage and tree branches covering up something on the ground. When they moved the debris, they found an additional victim. This victim was naked and stripped of all of his belongings. So we'll come back to him in a minute. Okay. FBI's Cyber Squad got a hit on the IP address. The address was to a man named Joe Bias in Akron, Ohio. Joe was just a regular guy with a wife and kid who was renting his basement apartment out. His tenant was a man named Dutch.
It's not Dutch.
Can you take a guess at who Dutch is?
It's not Dutch.
Exactly. It's Richard.
It's Jack, aka Richard.
Yes. Dutch was using Joe's computer to place these Craigslist ads. Joe didn't have the computer anymore, as he traded it to him for a box of random items, some of which were items that belonged to David Pauly. When searching the basement apartment, they found medicine bottles that were prescribed to a man named Ralph Geiger. Ralph Geiger was close to his sister, Kathy. She hadn't heard from him on her birthday. She became concerned. Kathy started calling his friends and other family members, none of which had heard from Ralph. One family member did tell Kathy that Ralph had left for Marietta, Ohio, for a job on a farm that he found on Craigslist. Ralph was having a difficult time finding a job, and just like David Pauly, was so excited that he finally found employment. After finding these medicine bottles that belonged to Ralph Geiger, the sheriff called Kathy and asked her to identify the body. She made a positive identification on the second male body that was found. The naked one under the debris. Ralph was pew-pewed in the back of the head, just like David Pauly, and what was supposed to happen to Scott Davis. Finally, the sheriff's office hears back about the security footage from the Shoney's. Apparently, one computer had been destroyed in the fire, but the one holding the footage did not get destroyed.
Oh, snap!
So the sheriff was able to pull the footage, and he recognized Richard Beasley from his mugshots and the warrant that the U.S. Marshals had sent over. The sheriff had showed the security footage to Scott Davis, who was able to positively identify the man he knew as Jack as Richard Beasley. And the nephew, who was with him, he identified him as well, but nobody knew what the name of this guy was.
Do we have an age for how old that?
He was 16.
So that child
Yes.
was. Okay.
So they don't know who the nephew is just yet.
Right.
The sheriff also showed the footage to Joe Bias, the landlord, who identified Dutch as Richard Beasley. Richard has a daughter named Tanya, so the sheriff decided to go talk to her and show her the surveillance footage with the hope of identifying the younger man in the video. Tanya is able to tell him that younger man's name is Brogan Rafferty, a 16-year-old that Richard was close with. The sheriff goes to Brogan's high school to interview him about Scott's attack. Brogan was very nonchalant about the crimes. He told the police that he dropped Richard and Scott off in the woods, and he left for a while, just driving down the road. When he turned around and came back, Richard was walking toward the direction that Brogan was driving. Brogan said that Richard told him it was settled, referring to the man with the job, and that it was time to go. Brogan told the sheriff that he believed Richard was taking the man to a house in the back of the woods. The sheriff was very skeptical about Brogan's story.
Yeah.
So they got a search warrant for Brogan's house, and in his bedroom, they found a briefcase that was essentially a murder kit. It contained pew-pew weapons, knives. They also found a poem that Brogan wrote, and I'm going to read it to you.
Oh no, I'm not prepared.
We took him out to the woods on a humid summer's night. I walked in front of them. They were going back to the car. I didn't turn around. A loud crack echoed, and I didn't hear the thud. I dug the hole. It reached my waist when I was in it. We put him in with difficulty. They call them stiff for a reason. We showered him with lime like a satanic baptism. When I got home, I took a shower hotter than hell itself. Prayed like hell that night. It was like we were excommunicating him from the world. So now the sheriff knows that Brogan is way more involved than he let on.
Yeah.
When Brogan returns home from school, he is arrested.
Naturally.
Yeah, you can't write a poem about what you did to a person.
Your confession?
Yeah. So now Joe Bias, he finds a note on his door from...
Remind me, who's Joe Bias?
He's the landlord.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Lots of names in this one.
It is. It's very confusing. So Joe Bias, the landlord, finds a note on his door from Dutch, or Richard. Note said that he knew the police had been around asking about him and asked for Joe to give him a call.
Oh, Joe.
The note had a different phone number on it than the one that the sheriff's office had. He called the police and told them about the note. The police were able to track this new number using cell tower information. They track him down to a street in Akron and arrest him. Richard did not give any information to the police, only asking for an attorney. Brogan, though, decided to talk about his relationship with Richard. He explained his family situation and described their relationship as an I'll do anything for you and you'll do anything for me type of relationship. Richard had convinced Brogan that he was all Brogan had and trained him to be his partner in crime that he needed to escape the police and the warrants. Richard had convinced Brogan that he was all Brogan had, and he trained him to be the partner in crime that he needed to escape police and the warrants.
And being 16 and so impressionable without present firm family members, not from lack of trying,
right,
but he didn't have that.
And Richard's been in his life since he was 9. You know, they started forming that bond when he was real young.
And it makes you wonder, when did the switch flip?
Right.
To, you know, taking this young man under my wing to help him. Because I think that Richard at one point had good intentions whenever he was working on the rehab and stuff, but then flipped, and then we're giving drugs to our people that we're trying to help recover, and then we're, you know, using our 16-year-old essentially nephew.
Right.
To commit murder. Like, that's not okay. What happened to make the switch flip, or if that's been his plan all along and he's been waiting.
Yeah, I don't know. I would hope that it wasn't his plan all along, and that he had good intentions and something happened, but I don't think Richard is ever going to tell us. But Brogan tells the police that their first victim was Ralph Geiger. He also told the police about 2 other men who the pair murdered. Candidates, as Richard would refer to them as.
Oh my gosh.
Including one victim that the authorities were unaware of. Timothy Kern was walking outside when Richard and Brogan approached him. The pair tell Timothy that they lost a watch in the woods while they were squirrel hunting, asking for Timothy's assistance in finding it.
So not at Shoney's.
No, this was in Akron. Oh. Sorry, I did forget to say that. This one takes place in Akron, so that's why they didn't find this body. When they got him into the woods, Richard asked how much money he had on him. Timothy had something like $5 on him, but it wasn't the money that Richard was after. It was more about the thrill for this murder. He didn't even want Timothy's identity at this point. It just shows signs of escalation. And I believe this was the last one before Scott. Timothy had multiple pew-pew shot wounds and was buried in the woods, but they hadn't prepped ahead of time for this. So they had to dig the grave after.
Flying by the seat of their
Exactly.
pants.
There was no plan in place like they usually had. Brogan was very frustrated with Richard after this murder. He was talking about how sloppy this one was, and he had no problem with murdering people. He just wanted it done perfectly, like the mob would do it. Brogan was obsessed with the mob. Brogan was offered a plea deal that would have him released on parole when he was still middle-aged. All he had to do was testify against Richard. And
he wouldn't.
Because he was 16, he was able to be charged as an adult. Brogan refused this plea deal out of loyalty to Richard.
That is crazy.
He was found guilty by a jury.
Yeah.
And he was sentenced to life in prison for 3 murder charges and an attempted murder. Richard was also charged with 3 counts of murder and an attempted murder. The prosecution didn't have any physical evidence of his crimes without being able to use Brogan. They were successful in getting a conviction, though, thankfully. Richard was found guilty and was sentenced to death for the murders of Ralph Geiger, David Pauley, and Timothy Kern, and for the attempted murder of Scott Davis. I also just kind of want to point out that Richard was caught just 2 weeks after Scott's attack. So they moved really quick because they didn't know about these other missing men. Like, they were reported missing by their families, but there was no reason for the Noble County Sheriff's Office to be, thinking about them in their day-to-day.
And what year was this?
2011. Yeah, 2 weeks from Scott's attack.
That is impressive, especially from little Noble and Washington counties.
Yes, small town Ohio. We're not talking Cleveland. We're not even talking the Akron police. The Noble County Sheriff's Office got this done with the help of the FBI. But they also were smart enough to call in the FBI when it was bigger than they could handle. And I think that says a lot because I read, you listen to a lot of these stories where police are battling over whose jurisdiction it is. They don't want to ask for help from anyone else.
Yeah.
So,
like, this is my case. Not anymore. It's not.
Exactly. And the Noble County Sheriff's Office was able to work in conjunction with the FBI
and come to a solution.
I think that's a case of the police working right.
Exactly.
And I'm proud to be from that town.
Because within the area we live in, I can think of a few other cases that did not end like this, that we still don't know anything enough about. And it's been years. Like, I can think of a few different
Oh, absolutely.
cases. But this 2 weeks?
2 weeks. So
that's amazing. It really is.
I just thought we should, add that in here and
congratulations.
Give them props where they're due. What do you guys think? Do you have any crazy Craigslist stories? Not this crazy, but anything crazy from Craigslist? I feel like that was a wild place.
Yeah, that was insane. Or do you have any near miss cases you'd like to tell us about? We would love to talk to any of you guys and hear your stories and even maybe talk about them here.
Yeah.
So make sure you guys are following us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, all at Spooky Sleuths Pod. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. We post every week.
Make sure you smash that like button.
And on that note,
stay spooky, friends.